Hi everybody, it's Rebecca Virginia, and today I'm going to be showing you 12 Valentine's Day DIYs. The first DIY is a Valentine's crate. Here's what you need to make it. To start off this DIY, we're going to take the wood crate from the Crafter's Square section of the Dollar Tree and paint it entirely in dark brown paint. While the paint on our wood crate dries, we can move on to the candle. I'm taking one of these emergency candles from the Dollar Tree and then some jute, and I am just hot gluing it to the bottom of the candle and wrapping it all the way up. Make sure that you do leave the bottom without the jute because that's the area that you need to twist off to add in the batteries. After I had added the jute all the way around the candle, I was continuing to DIY some things to go in the crate. So I knew one of the main items that I wanted were these wood heart ornaments. So I just started off by painting them red, and then I gave them each their own little embellishment. The first heart I added white polka dots to using white paint and the back end of a paintbrush. Then on the second heart, I took some jute and I wrapped it all the way around the heart twice. On the third heart, I decided to add a little white felt heart to the very center of it. I liked the pop of the white against the dark red. Now, in order to make sure that our hearts stand up inside of our wood crate, I am taking some wood dowels and painting them a dark brown. We're going to end up hot gluing the hearts onto the wood dowels. Also, if you don't have wood dowels, you can always use kebab sticks, which you can find in the kitchen section. For another embellishment for our wood crate, I am taking these heart chalkboard tags. These are found in the Crafter's Square section of the Dollar Tree, and I've seen them all year round, not just during Valentine's Day. To add a bit of texture to our wood crate, I'm taking some jute and just stringing it all the way along the crate on the top and bottom of those little crevices. For a sign on our wood crate, I am taking this XOXO galvanized sign. This came in a set of 3 different kinds of Valentine's Day galvanized signs. And now is the fun part because we get to arrange our wood crate and all of the embellishments going inside. I did fill the crate up with some floral foam from the Dollar Tree, and then after I placed the candle in the center, I just used all of the heart embellishments that we made, as well as these floral picks, which are really pretty pink and red roses, also from the Dollar Tree. And I just had fun arranging these in lots of different ways until I found a way that I liked the best. And now your Valentine's Day themed wood crate is complete. The second DIY is a rustic heart frame. Here are the supplies you'll need. In this DIY, we're going to be using 2 of the frames from the Dollar Tree. So first, I'm starting out by just removing the backing and the glass from our wood frames. The idea for this DIY is to have one of the frames a little bit smaller so that it fits perfectly on top of the larger frame. So to do this, I didn't have a mitering tool or anything, so I just made cuts in the sides and on the top in the middle in order to shrink down the frame. Then once I had my frame cut into pieces, I was able to hot glue it back together, and this time instead of being the same exact size as the other frame, it was a little bit smaller. I really liked the faux wood look of these frames, so I just took some white paint and painted over it, and the faux wood still shined through, just not as deeply as it had before. Once the paint has dried, I am able to hot glue the smaller frame on top of the larger frame, and as you can see, this gives a multi-dimensional look to the frames. To add a background for our rustic heart, I am taking some shiplap looking scrapbooking paper and I'm just outlining it with a pen and then cutting it out, and I did use Mod Podge to adhere it down onto the picture frame. Again, I always use an old gift card to smooth out any air bubbles that may have formed on the scrapbooking paper. Now that we've put our picture frame back together, it's time to add our rustic heart. So this grapevine heart is from the Dollar Tree, and I didn't see them last year, so I think they're new this year, and they come in a pack of 5. Make sure that when you're buying them though, you really look at the shape of them, because I've heard some people say when they got home and took them out of the package, they realized that the grapevines were not in the shape of the heart. Luckily, my packaging came in a really great shaped heart, so then I just took some of this floral garland and wrapped it around twice. To hang the rustic heart from our white picture frames, I hot glued a bit of white ribbon to the back and then a little bit to the front of the rustic heart. To make a fake knob on this frame, I took one of these brain teaser games from the children's section of the Dollar Tree, and when you cut the string in the center, you're left with all of these really gorgeous wood beads. I added a little bit of hot glue to one of the, well, now I'm going to call them beads, even though it was a brain teaser game, and then I just hot glued it on top of the ribbon. And with that, your rustic heart frame is complete. Now you're ready to display it anywhere. The third DIY is a welcome I love you sign. Here are the supplies you need to recreate it. To start off this DIY, I'm taking wood planks from the Dollar Tree and painting them in a dark brown color. These wood planks come 6 to a pack, so since we're only using 3 for this DIY, you have 3 more to use for a later project. I painted my 2 outer planks in the dark brown, and then for the center plank, I'm just using a white chalk paint and painting it all over. I wanted the white plank to look a little bit more rustic and not so bright white, so I took the same dark brown color and just lightly dry brushed it to make it look like a piece of wood. To add some texture to the dark brown planks, I took 2 pieces of burlap fabric, cut them into rectangles, and then frayed the edges. It's really easy to fray the edges on burlap, you just grab a loose string and pull. Next, I hot glued the burlap pieces onto the dark brown wood planks. I didn't have a stencil of the alphabet that fit the wood planks how I liked it, so all that I did was went onto Pinterest and I found these alphabet letters. So then I just put them into a Word document on my computer and printed them out. Once they were printed out, I cut them and just taped them down onto the wood planks, and then I had my own DIY stencil. With my stencils down on my wood planks, I took a little dowel sponger, and I'm just sponging on some black paint to fill in the stencil. I picked up these wood hearts from the Dollar Tree, and I absolutely loved them and knew that I wanted to use it in this project. But the red was a little bit too bright for me, but I liked the sizing, so that was just me painting over it with a little bit darker of a red color. Now that my paint has dried, I am able to remove the stencils, and I'm very happy because they came out perfect, the I and the U, and now it is time to hot glue the heart down into the center. I wanted to add a little something more to this middle plank with the heart, so I took some jute and just started winding it around the plank, and it kind of made this web looking design, which I really liked, so then I just hot glued it in the back to secure it in place. Same as the white plank, I still thought that the brown ones needed a little something something, so I had this really pretty red gingham ribbon, so I just wrapped it around the tops of both of those planks and hot glued it in the back. To finish off the middle sign, I took a spare button that I had and placed it in the center of that jute webbing we created. I love this welcome sign from the Dollar Tree, and I think it's super cute on its own without any DIY, but of course we're going to take it apart. First I sanded off all the glitter, and then I just took a black paint pen and filled in the entire welcome just with the black paint. After I had filled everything in, I took the sign apart, and I'm going to be using the second half for some other DIY. I'm sure I love the galvanized hearts, so I'm definitely going to save it for something else. But now that we just have the welcome sign, it's time to attach the wood planks to our sign. Originally, I was going to hang the signs with either ribbon or jute, but then I remembered that I had this really festive red floral wire from the Dollar Tree, so I just took some needle nose pliers to curl the wire into like a little circle curlicue, and now I'm just cutting them down, and I'm going to hot glue the planks to the wire and then the wire to the sign. One mistake I did almost make is when I flipped the planks over, I had the I and the U swapped, so definitely make sure if you're going to be doing this project that you make sure you have your letters in the correct order. And that completes your Welcome I Love You rustic sign. Next we have our last DIY for this Rustic Valentine's Day video. Here's what you need to make your own. I have seen this last DIY all over Pinterest, and a lot of other YouTubers have done it, but I just couldn't help it. I think these are so cute, so I had to make my own. And what I'm doing is taking the tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree, They are in the children's department. They were also sold during the Christmas season. You could get like an extra large packet, which was awesome. And I'm just painting them white, and then I very lightly distress the edges of it in a dark brown paint color. To start building our people, I took some hot glue and I'm just gluing the tumbling tower blocks together. And I ended up doing this for every single one, so they all came in pairs. And then I combined them together to make our couple. I wanted one of my wood people to be taller than the other one, but an entire tumbling tower block was too tall for me. So I ended up cutting one of the tumbling tower blocks in half and hot gluing them together. Then I used this yellow color called taffy, and I painted some wood beads, and they are going to be my people's heads. Next, it was time to attach the heads to the bodies, and I did this with some hot glue. And I did realize I probably should have used a smaller wood bead for the shorter person, because when I pushed the blocks together to glue them, it wasn't exactly flush because the head was in the way, but I think it still worked. To add some embellishment or detail to our wood couple, I took some jute and I just started wrapping it from the left down to the right until I came up with a web pattern that I liked. To make sure that the jute pattern didn't slip or fall down, I did put a little bit of hot glue on the back, and that's how I secured it at the beginning and at the end. I was originally going to use a wood heart for this, but I liked the pop of color, so I ended up taking one of my felt red hearts and placing it down the center. Where I put the half of a tumbling tower block, I did fill in with a bit of wood spackle, and while that spackle was drying, I took a wood slice from the Dollar Tree and glued my people on top of it as a base for them. Lastly, I took a bit of white paint and just painted over the spackle I had filled in earlier.
The next Valentine's Day DIY is a buffalo check heart. Here's what you need to recreate this.
To begin this DIY, I needed a small wood heart, so I got this hanging heart sign from the Dollar Tree and removed the bottom heart off of it. After peeling the tape off, I took some sandpaper to sand off all of the glitter that was on the heart. After removing all of the glitter, I was able to paint a pale pink color onto the smooth surface of the heart. This did take a couple of coats because it is such a light pink color. While my paint was drying on the smaller heart, I moved to the larger heart for this DIY. I used black and white buffalo check scrapbooking paper to cover my wood heart. I applied some Mod Podge onto the heart surface, and then I used an old gift card to smooth the paper down onto the heart. This is a really great technique because it gets out any of the air bubbles that might be caused from laying the paper onto the wet Mod Podge. I was actually running out of my buffalo check scrapbooking paper, so I had to kind of piece my scrapbooking paper down onto the heart. So if you're also using this technique, just make sure to be careful that your buffalo check lines up. You don't want the lines suddenly shifting if you're using different pieces of the same scrapbooking paper. To add a farmhouse touch, and because I usually like a less clean looking edge on my projects, I used white paint and dry brushed it all along the edges of the buffalo check heart. I also took a tumbling tower block from the Dollar Tree and painted it the same pale pink as the small heart. I'm hot gluing the wood block onto the smaller heart so that the pink heart is slightly elevated off of the buffalo check heart. Next, I used burlap ribbon to wrap around the lower half of my buffalo check heart. And I wanted it to appear like the burlap ribbon was holding the small pink heart in place, so that's why I placed it on the lower half of the heart. Next, to add a bit of color and a little touch of spring, even though it's very far away for us right now, I added a little bit of this greenery from a floral pick that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I just hot glued it right underneath the burlap ribbon, so again it kind of looks like the burlap ribbon is holding not only the floral pick, but the heart in place too. As a final touch for this first DIY, I took some black and white buffalo check ribbon that I actually got from way back in the fall, and I just tied it in a simple knot at the top of this rope that's holding up our sign, and then I frayed the edges a little bit and cut them so it looked like it was a worn ribbon. And that's all it takes to recreate this simple and easy Valentine's Day DIY. The second DIY is a Key to My Heart decor piece. Here's what you need to make your own. I began by putting Mod Podge onto the back of the wooden house, but I quickly realized I got too excited by this DIY because I forgot to cut out my scrapbooking paper first. So once I remembered that, I cut out my paper and then I was able to Mod Podge it onto the house. And in this DIY, I'm using one of the wooden houses from the Dollar Tree that kind of look like shadow boxes, but I bought it mainly for the shape, and I'm actually going to be using only the back of it for this DIY. Like I mentioned in the previous DIY, I don't like clean edges, so I'm dry brushing all around the wood house with a dry brush and some black paint. Lucky for me, I had an old dictionary laying around, but I know you can look on Pinterest and lots of other places on the internet and find old pages that you can just print out. But I am actually using an old dictionary for this one, and I got the page that had Valentine's Day on it. So I tried to use that one, and I tried to get Valentine's in at least one of the hearts. I had two ideas for what I wanted to do, and I wasn't sure which one I liked better. So I ended up cutting out two hearts and doing them both, and then I decided which one I would go with. So the first idea that I had, please be careful with because you are using a flame, but I wanted it to look like a burnt page, so I burned all the way around the edges of the heart so that they curled up and kind of went black. Then my second idea was to just rip the edges of the heart so it looked like someone had ripped the page straight out of a book and it just magically got torn out into the shape of a heart. And I really liked both of them. I think they're both cool and, nice ideas, but I ended up going with the torn heart as my final pick for the DIY. Once I had decided which heart to go with, I went ahead and Mod Podge that down on top of the buffalo check scrapbooking paper. If you are going to be using an actual dictionary page like me, make sure to use very little Mod Podge and be careful when you're putting it down because the pages are a lot thinner than scrapbooking paper. For an extra embellishment, I took a red felt heart sticker and I placed it down in the center of our dictionary heart. These are such a great deal from the Dollar Tree. You get 100 of these felt stickers for only $1, and they have pink, white, red, and I think maybe one other color too that I'm forgetting. I had this really pretty white lace that has hearts hanging from it, so I wrapped two of these around my wood house. And originally I just had them parallel, but I thought that looked too uniform, so I made them have an X where they crossed in the very center of the house. Next up, I took some jute and I just wrapped it a bunch of times in that same kind of X formation around our wood house. After I had finished wrapping the lace and the jute around the wood house, I realized it was really covering up the red felt heart and you couldn't really see it anymore. So to make sure that the red heart was still the center of this project, I took another one and just placed it on top. It kind of worked because it had a little bit more of a 3D effect, but if you want to skip the heart in the beginning and just add it on the end, I think that works too. The last embellishment that I'm adding is this really pretty ornate looking key, and I just wrapped it in jute, tied a knot, and then after it was secure and hung a little bit off of the wooden house, I added a bow. This ornate key is something that I already owned before I decided to do this project, but if you don't have a key on hand, you can always print one out or cut one out of cardboard. The third DIY is a trio of faux wooden blocks. Here's what you need to complete this DIY on your own. To start off this DIY, I took some white chalk paint and completely covered the orange dice. These are foam dice, so they absorb the paint pretty quickly, so you have to use quite a few coats. And the orange is super bright, so again, it took quite a few coats of white paint to completely cover them. I'm going to be covering the front part of these foam dice in scrapbooking paper, so I chose two different types of paper. The middle die is going to be a red print of scrapbooking paper, while the two outside dice I'm going to be using white paper. It's kind of hard to trace the die because they curve, but after tracing and cutting, I just cut down the paper more as needed so that none of the edges were popping up and everything was laying flush on the front of the dice. Then I decided that the white paper was too plain, so I took a toothpick and dipped it into pink and red paint to make polka dots all across the white scrapbooking paper. And before gluing on the scrapbooking paper, I wanted to distress my dice a bit because they were looking way too stark white and plain. So I dry brushed a brown paint all over the dice to add some definition. I use Mod Podge to adhere the scrapbooking paper onto the dice. Because the dice are curved, make sure that you put Mod Podge onto the edges of the paper so that they stick down to the dice and aren't popping up. Next, it's time to add the I Heart You to the dice. I have these big poster sticker letters, so I used the I and the U from that. And then I took from that 100 pack of Dollar Tree felt heart stickers, one of the hearts to put on the center one. And I ended up thinking that I was first going to do it kind of stacking like a snowman or tower blocks, but I really liked the way that it looked horizontally rather than vertically, so that's what I ended up using as the final product. The finishing touch to add more of a farmhouse feel was to make a small bow out of jute and add it to the center of the heart. The last DIY is a Love You More frame. Here's what you need. I'm starting off this DIY by taking a picture frame from the Dollar Tree and removing the glass and the backing. Next, I took a white paint and I'm painting the frame entirely in white. This did take quite a few coats because the frame is pretty dark. While my many coats of white paint dry, I decided to move on to the next step while I wait. So I'm taking a piece of burlap, and before I'm cutting it, I know that I want my sign to say "Love You." So first I took some of the letter stickers and wrote that out. Then when I saw how much space that took up, I decided that I could cut the burlap into a smaller section. After cutting it into a smaller piece, I completed the saying by "Love You More." And I know that I'm going to add a heart next to the more, so I'm leaving a bit of space there. Now, the next method that I'm using is taking a little paintbrush and dabbing on some brown paint, and I'm covering the words entirely so that once the paint is dry, I can peel the stickers off and the "Love You More" saying will be left. I took a red felt heart sticker and placed it next to the more at a slight angle. Then I trimmed up my piece of burlap and began pulling at the edges so that they looked frayed. After completing my burlap piece, it was time to cover my picture frame. So I'm taking the sample and outlining this onto the scrapbooking paper. Then I cut it out and used some Mod Podge to adhere the scrapbooking paper to the backing of our picture frame. After placing down our paper, it was time to go back to the actual frame. So once that had dried, I thought that it needed a little something more, so I took a dark red color and just started to distress the frame a little so that it wasn't so stark white. Lastly, it's time to assemble our frame, so we want to put in the backing that now has the scrapbooking paper on it. Then I took a hot glue gun just to make sure that my burlap piece was nice and adhered and not moving anywhere.
The next Valentine's Day craft is a DIY Crackle heart. Here's what you need.
The first step in this DIY is to sand off all of the glitter that's on the sign because you want a smooth surface for painting. Next up, I took a red paint because that's the color that I want to show through on the crackle. But you can decide whatever color that you would like, but just note that that is the color that's going to be cracked and showing through. And I did about, I think, 3 coats because it's a pretty thin paint and my sign was dark and had a lot of lettering. You don't have to have it completely opaque, but you want it mostly covered with the paint. Now we are going to begin doing our crackle paint method. So first off, I'm just taking some liquid glue from the Dollar Tree. This is just the Jot brand, so you don't need anything fancy. And I am just smearing this on the heart. And as you can see, there's different layers of thickness to the glue. You want to spread it on actually pretty messy because crackle isn't uniform when it happens naturally. It's going to be different layers of crackle. So having the thin and the thick parts are going to give you different textures on the heart. Next is the tricky part because you want to dry your glue about 75% of the way. I actually don't have a heat gun, so this is me just using my hair dryer, and I ended up using a high setting and drying it for 60 seconds. If you didn't want to count for 60 seconds, you can kind of tell because the glue will actually start to bubble up and wrinkle. It's kind of weird looking, and that's how you know that it is almost dried. Once the glue has reached this semi-dried state, you're going to immediately paint over it with some chalk paint. And you can kind of see that I'm more so dabbing the paint on rather than really using a heavy hand and dragging. And the reason is I don't want to burst the glue bubbles. They're kind of fragile in this state, so I just want to delicately go over them because I don't want to mix the glue with the paint. I just want to put the paint over top of the glue. Now you can just let the paint air dry and do its work and Crackle will happen. But this was the first time I had ever tried Crackle paint and I was really excited to see if it would actually work. So I again took my hair dryer because I wanted it to dry super fast. And as you can see, it did start to crackle and the red started to poke through. That's because when the glue dries, it will then crack the paint. So once I was happy with how the bottom of the heart turned out, I figured I can go ahead and finish doing the crackle on the rest of the heart. So I am again very messily putting down the glue because I want those varying levels of thickness and using my hair dryer to dry it about 75% of the way, or 60 seconds. Again, I am using white chalk paint for my top layer. I'm not sure if you're able to use regular acrylic paint. When I tried this, I used chalk paint, and everything that I had read online said that you needed to use chalk paint, so you can give it a try with acrylic, and if you do, let me know in the comments down below if it worked for you. But otherwise, I would suggest only using chalk paint as your topper on the glue. And this right here is a really good example of those glue bubbles that will form, and you can see how I'm really delicately going over it because I don't want to pop that bubble. And of course, I had to put in a few more clips of the paint and the glue crackling because I just think this effect is so cool and I'm definitely going to be using it in more of my DIY projects in the future. Again though, you don't need a hair dryer or a heat gun. The paint and the glue will do this effect on their own. The heat doesn't add anything other than speeding up the drying process. As our last section of the wood heart is drying, it's time to move on to the clothespins because I want to paint these. So I had what I thought was a genius idea to put the clothespins onto a kebab stick, and that way I could hold the stick and paint them effortlessly. And that worked for about one clothespin, and then they just started flying off of this kebab stick. So I realized I just had to do it the kind of difficult way, so I just attached the clothespins to my fingers and I painted them that way. I'm sure that there's an easier way to do this, but this is the way that I went with. And it was kind of funny because it looked like I had these really super long and sharp red nails on, so I was having fun with it at least. Once the clothespins were painted red and fully dried, I pinned them onto the wood heart and then I moved on to making a layered bow. To start off my layered bow, I took some red buffalo check ribbon that I had from way back in the fall at the Dollar Tree when they stocked it, so I was able to use that, and then I just layered on some burlap and satin bows on top. After trimming my bows so that I had a bit more room to add pictures, I went ahead and added a jute hanger. All I did was hot glue a little bit of jute to the back so that I could then hang my heart frame. The last step is to add some pictures of your choice to our wooden heart. I think if you have a Polaroid camera, that size of picture would fit perfectly. I unfortunately don't, so I just went ahead and added some smaller pictures that I took last spring. The second DIY is a grapevine heart topiary. Here's what you need to recreate it. To start off this Valentine's Day topiary, I took a clay pot from the Dollar Tree and painted it white. Also, if you've been enjoying these Valentine's Day videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and the notification bell. While my clay pot is still drying, I'm moving on to our rustic heart. So I found this really pretty purple garland actually at the world's largest Dollar Tree. If you haven't seen the video where I take you guys through the world's largest Dollar Tree, I'll link that above. But right now I'm just taking some of this purple berry garland and I went around the rustic heart twice and then just tied it off at the bottom. I then took a wood dowel and I painted it in a dark brown color and hot glued it to the back of our rustic heart, and this way our heart will have something to put down into the clay pot. Once the pot was dried, I thought the white looked a little plain, so I went onto Google and really just searched Victorian hearts, and this was the principle that I found. I'll link it below in case you want to use the same one. And all I did was print it out, cut it, and then I took some Mod Podge and placed it onto our clay pot. To fill up our pot so that we have something to stick that wood dowel into, I took some floral foam from the Dollar Tree and I just cut out a small piece of it and stuck it into the pot. Then I just took some scissors and trimmed off the excess that was at the top. To cover up that floral foam and to make a base for our rustic heart, I took some Spanish moss from the Dollar Tree and just used hot glue to adhere it on top of the floral foam. After placing the dowel that held my rustic heart into the clay pot, I was able to finish adding some Spanish moss all around it. I took a pair of scissors and just trimmed off some of the Spanish moss that was looking a little crazy or coming out way too far, and then after that, the final touch was to take a thin piece of black ribbon and just make a simple bow on the top of my floral arrangement. And that's all you need to do to make your own grapevine heart topiary. The third DIY is a home heart sign. Here are the supplies you'll need to make it. I'm starting off with these wood hearts, which came on a Dollar Tree sign in a set of 5. I used 2 of them on a previous project, and now I'm going to be using these 3. I started off by sanding off all of the glitter, and then I painted 2 of the hearts pink and 1 of them red. To change it up a little bit from the traditional Valentine's Day, instead of going with a red or pink for this home wood sign, I decided to go with gray, so I painted the entire sign in a light gray paint. These galvanized hearts came on a larger Dollar Tree sign that I took apart last week for a project, and I'm glad that I saved them because I'm going to be using them on top of the wood hearts for this DIY. If you didn't have the galvanized hearts or didn't want to use them, I also think it would be really cute to write down names of your family members on the hearts. To match the galvanized hearts on our small wood hearts, I wanted to make a faux galvanized paint effect on the heart in the home sign. So to do this, I'm just taking a little bit of a sponge and some black paint and sponging all over in lots of different directions. Then once that has dried, I go over it with some gray paint using the same technique, using it on a little sponge in all sorts of different directions. You're going to continue just repeating putting down black paint, then gray paint, then black paint, then gray paint until you reach that desired faux galvanized looking effect. To further tie in the home sign to our hearts, I took the same baby pink color that I painted 2 of the hearts, and I did that on the insides and outsides of the home sign. I didn't have to be perfect or precise when I was putting in that pink color because I ended up going over the top of the home sign with gray to get rid of any pink that might have seeped through. I was originally going to use jute to attach the hearts to our home sign, but then I found this really great wire in my craft drawer, so I doubled it up and added a little loop at the top, and that's how we're going to attach the wood hearts. Since this is a Valentine's Day video, I had to make the wire a little bit cuter, so I took a pencil and wound the wire around it so it had this springy kind of curly form to it. I stretched out the wires a little bit. I wanted the red heart to dangle not too much from the home sign, and then I wanted the pink hearts to be on the outer parts of the home sign and hang a little bit longer. I just attached them with some hot glue and that held up perfectly. And I wanted a little bit something extra still on this sign. I felt like it wasn't quite complete. So I took some scraps of fabric and pulled and frayed the edges and then tied them around the heart. As a final step on this home heart sign, I took that same wire that I used to hold up the hearts to the home sign and I just wrapped it around the jute hanger. And that's all you need to do to make your own home sign with hanging galvanized hearts. The last Valentine's Day DIY is a vinyl cling frame. Here's what you'll need to make it. This is such a quick and easy DIY and it's perfect for beginners. We're going to start by taking the glass out of the frame and then cutting a piece of scrapbooking paper using the fake photo inside the frame as a stencil. To adhere the scrapbooking paper onto the picture frame, I put down a little bit of Mod Podge and then place the scrapbooking paper on top. I always use an old gift card to smooth out any of the air bubbles that may have formed after I put down the scrapbooking paper on top of the Mod Podge. I originally wanted to just scatter on some of this heart table scatter inside of the frame and let it just hang out at the bottom. But the frame that I chose is not a shadow box frame, so there's really not any room to put a ton of scatter at the bottom of it. So I just took a little bit of Mod Podge and placed it over that scrapbooking paper and then tried to just throw the hearts down and place them on top of the Mod Podge. I really like the way that this came out because it looks like the hearts did just scatter across the scrapbooking paper, but really we know that it's the Mod Podge keeping everything held into place. Once the Mod Podge has fully dried, it's time to put our frame back together, first by placing the glass down and then putting the backing back into the frame. The final step of this DIY is to add in our window cling. This is from the Dollar Tree and it comes in a whole sheet of other really cute and fun Valentine's Day window clings. So I just cut off some of the excess hearts that didn't fit inside the frame, and then I just pressed down the truck. And that completes all of the Farmhouse Valentine's Day DIYs. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep searching, keep creating.